Now that we have our server configured for Django, in this video we're going to transfer our project files onto our server and set up our project. To do that, we're going to want to fire up FileZilla. And navigate to our sample projects folder. Next, I always like making backups of working directories. If we were using Git, then we could track our changes there, but since I left Git out to simplify this course, I'm going to at least make a copy of our project directory by dragging it into my backup directory on my local computer. Great. Now let's copy over our project files inside our main project directory into our root project directory on our server. Note that you could change the name of your project directory if you want, but just remember you'll have to modify your Apache configuration files as we did in the last video to keep them in sync with this modified path. Since we have a copy of the project folder, I'm going to delete it from the server. Now I'm going to connect to my server. You should probably know your server's IP by now, but since I have a few going on at once, I'm going to look it up on the dashboard again. Okay, now that we're in, whenever I copy files over from my computer with FileZilla, I like to make sure that the current user owns them and has read-write privileges, just to make sure. So let's verify that. Now we're going to need to update our configuration files to match the new name of our project. As you'll remember from the Django server configuration video, the file for Bitnami that we'll need to edit is httpd-app. For a regular Ubuntu installation, you'll recall that you'll want to edit the apache2.conf file. Let's open our configuration file and make sure our paths are up to date. Awesome. Make sure that you overwrite your server's file by clicking yes and that the transfer succeeds. If it doesn't, you'll want to make sure that your current user has read-write permissions. Next, let's open up our WSGI file in our local project. We'll need to be extra sure that our project is on the Python path. So let's manually append it to the path in this script. Next, every now and then Python gets weirded out by where the egg cache directory is, so let's nip that potential error in the bud by specifying it to be in our project folder. Okay, now let's restart Apache to update these settings and create that folder. Okay, it's time to check what we see in the browser. Cross your fingers. Okay, this looks bad, but it's actually great news. What we're seeing is an operational error that says that Django wasn't able to log into the database. And that's fine because we haven't modified our database settings in our settings.py file yet. So what we're not seeing, thankfully, is an internal error thrown by Apache. So if you do have project errors other than a database issue, such as something to do with Apache, it could be because your server is missing project-specific dependencies that you need to install on the server. Or it could be because you did something a bit different than what I did and Apache isn't happy. So you'll want to check the server log at opt bitnami apache2 logs error log for more information. Okay, let's get our database set up. First, let's pull up our settings.py file and remind ourselves of the database name. We'll need to create this database before we can connect to it. But first, we'll want to change the login to reflect our server's database login current settings, which for Bitnami is the root password, and for regular Ubuntu, it's the password that you set up when you installed MySQL or PostgreSQL. Oh, let's not forget to restart our server after these changes to our settings.py file. As you can see, the operational error is that test database is unknown, and that's for a good reason. We haven't created it yet. So let's do that now. I'm going to use my favorite database GUI, SQL Pro, for this task. But as I've mentioned in the past, feel free to use MySQL Workbench or the equivalent on PostgreSQL. They should all be capable of handling these simple commands. If they don't, please ask me a question in the discussion panel and I'll try and help you out. So in SQL Pro, all you have to do is go to the database column and click Add Database. We'll want it to match our settings file, which is called test database. If we refresh our server, we'll see that the error is now that certain tables don't yet exist in our database. We can get rid of this error two ways. We can run a database migrate command from Django, which will initialize our database with all the tables we need but lose all the data. Or we can export our local database and import it into our server so we can see the old questions and results. I'm going to choose the latter option, but feel free to simply run Python manage.py migrate from your project folder instead. But note that if you get an error complaining about the MySQL socket when trying to run the Django migrate command on your server, what could have happened if you're running Bitnami is that you stopped and started your server and a temporary symlink wasn't reinstalled. So to fix that, if you get an error, you'll want to replace it by typing sudo ln-s opt bitnami mysql temp mysql.sock and temp for mysql. Let me log into my local database. Note that this was set up in a different course that you can view here. And now let's export all the tables by highlighting them and going to File, Export. You'll see that this is going to export SQL and all the tables are highlighted. Perfect. Now I'm going to switch over to my server database that I have running in another tab. And inside my test database, I'm going to import the local database's SQL. Boom, perfect. Let's test. Aha, it's working. As you can see, our website is functional and the database and URLs are working great. Wonderful. Obviously, the CSS is not yet installed, so the page doesn't look cool yet, but that's what we're going to tackle in the next video, where we set up our Amazon server to serve our static files, otherwise known as CSS, JS, and images.